Hi, I'm Rochelle, and you're watching or listening to BoxBox F1 Pod. Welcome to part 2 of Get Ready With Me for the 2021 F1 season. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, the setup might be a bit confusing, but in part 1, we did like a whole who's who situation and walked our way through the paddock, got to know everyone, and I made scones while I did it because we're spilling tea. So it's a stretch, but here we are. So the scones are baked and I was going to assemble one as we start chatting. So if you haven't seen part 1 yet, totally don't have to watch it before this, except for the baking will be in reverse. But otherwise, the content in that one doesn't impact this one. You can totally watch it after. But today we are going to be talking about today, it's the same day for me. We're going to be talking about we're going to do a quick digital warm up and talk about some of the stuff that happened off season that will impact the new season. So end of season stuff and rumors and F1 news and yada, yada, yada. And then we will get into, what's it called? DTS, Drive to Survive, season 7, which we'll use to refresh our memories on what happened in 2024 and really prepare ourselves mentally for 2025. And I say it's not just like a proper debrief because I'm gonna also be correcting all the stuff they got wrong as we go along. And yeah, so without further ado, and for the first time in 2025, let's kick things off with the digital warm up. Lap 1. So end of season stuff, and I'm only including this because I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but Carlos's send-off from Ferrari was incredibly wholesome. Not only did they put together a whole video of his highlights after the race that they watched all together, he finally cried. He was like, you guys finally got me emotional. But they also brought him to Maranello so he could say bye to everyone at the factory. And they arranged like this whole thing where him and his dad both got to drive a Ferrari on the track there. And Charles came to watch and it was like really cute and wholesome. I don't know. They all seemed to like love him a lot. Like his media person, everyone was crying that he was leaving. And they kept saying like, see you later, which like Delulu me is like, oh, he's coming back. But they also gifted him like a very exclusive F1 car. Ferrari, like road Ferrari, not F1 car. That was a little crazy. I think it was worth multiple millions. I've just like never seen a send off like that for a driver that's not like retiring, but that was fired. It's just like a little unusual in the best way possible. And it just makes me even sadder that they're getting rid of him. And also, obviously, Charles was super upset the whole time because he obviously wanted the Constructors' Championship for himself and for Ferrari, but he also kept saying, like, I really wanted to send Carlos off with a bang and to say that we won it together. And I just thought that was really wholesome. Speaking of send-offs, though, I was a little confused why Lewis was the only one that got to do donuts. And there were a bunch of people who were actually leaving. Like Lando said, Lewis is just changing teams, like not retiring. And usually I'm like, oh, Lando, but like fair enough though. Like there are 4 people, I think, that are no longer racing. Other people switched teams and no one really got the same send off. I know not everyone is on the same caliber as Lewis, but like still, it was a bit odd that no one else like got to do donuts. I remember there was a video of like Zhou Guanyu like skirting off to the side and doing like a donut by himself where no one could see him, which is kind of sad. Like he deserves a send off too. Anyway, that's my little like unfinished business from the previous season. And now let's move on to lap 2 preseason. Oh my God, so good. Wow. I've been really regretting choosing scones because I'm a bad baker. I'm like, why would I kick off the season with something I don't know how to do? Turns out I do know how. All right, lap 2, preseason, starting with the team shoot. So I don't know if anyone's seen it. So I don't know why I'm eating on camera. Wow, that's really good. Damn. All right. So there's been a lot of interesting creative direction lately with all the F1 stuff. there was like a weird Lady Gaga inspired photo shoot. I don't know if there's some weird brand deal coming up between Lady Gaga and F1, but they all basically had the drivers, they redid all the drivers' headshots to look like Lady Gaga's album. Super weird. And then there's the team photo. And in previous years, they would kick off each season with a group photo of all the drivers. I know they would like line them up on the grid and like on chairs and stuff. And it looked like a class photo. Someone was holding like a chalkboard, like saying like F1 class of 2025. It was really cute. And then last year, and this was covered in DTS, they decided to get like artsy. So they have like these colorful cubes that they had the drivers like dispersed upon in like an empty like blank canvas type situation. And all the drivers were like, the fuck is this? And the creative team was like, heard, let's replace the cubes with tires, as if that was the problem. So same sort of situation. They're all like artsily, like looking like a Vogue cover around this like white blank background, other than one step that says F1 across like that. And then there's random tires spread about. And that's it. And they're all like positioned awkwardly. And whoever like decided where people go, like it looks like an Avengers photo, which is fine, but like I don't understand what it has to do with this. Like Carlos is just bang up in the, I'm looking at the picture just so I can remember. Carlos is like bang up in the middle. Like it's his photo shoot. Like this is me. This is all about me. Like literally bang on, head straight down the center. Next to him is Max. And then like 10 miles to the side is Charles Leclerc. And everyone else is kind of grouped together, but Charles is like, there's like not enough people to fill the gaps between him and everyone else. So he looks like literally completely alone. And like, I don't understand how they picked who goes where. Like for some reason, Carlos is dead center and then Alex Albon is in the very, very back. So if it's by teammates, shouldn't he be closer? And if it's by grid position, why is Carlos in the middle? Not that I'm complaining. He looks fabulous, but Alex doesn't look bad enough to like shove him in the back. There was a funny video of the behind the scenes where Oscar is like, he's one of the people like on the tires, and the photographer was like, do you feel comfortable like putting your foot on the tire? And then Oscar was like, not really, but I'll do it. It made me laugh. Also, after that shoot, which they all hated just as much as last year, as they all start leaving, like they're like, okay, we're done. And then they immediately just lunge forward to get the fuck out of there. There was a moment where all of the rookies just like envelop Max. Like Max starts walking and he's immediately surrounded by like his crew of rookies. Just all of them like gravitate towards him. So it was like Isaac from RB, Liam from Red Bull, Ollie from Haas, and Kimi from Mercedes. And it's just so funny to me because it's exactly the opposite of the persona the media, Netflix, his fellow drivers, all FIA, all try to portray of him being this like giant asshole on and off track. And what's extra funny is that the FIA's crusade, swearing crusade against him, like their argument for that is that it sets a bad example for young people watching. And here he is leading this group of youngsters. And then George's entire arc, like his whole beef, the premise of his beef with Max is that Max is setting a bad example and is a bad role model, and their jobs are to be good role models for future generations of drivers. And his own teammate is like, loves Max. Because I was like, Max is such a nice guy. And they're all just around him. And there's like, that's not the only example. There's like, all throughout testing, you could see them all like finding him. He's always with a rookie. And I love it so much because A, he'll be a great dad. B, is just like the opposite of what everyone says about him. And I wish it was shown more, but it was just a really cute moment. It was like Mama Duck and all her little geese. I know Mama Ducks don't have geese. It's fine. All right. Speaking of the beef, George I actually don't remember what the beef was about. And I probably should have looked it up, but then you end up going through this, like, it's just like a never ending spiral of content. They were beefing at the end of the year because George didn't like something Max was doing. They had like, I think they had a clash on track. He didn't like how Max handled it and started saying he was a bad example and like went on a giant crusade against him. And Max was like, oh, he was saying Max had called George two-faced because George, okay, they had an incident during qualifying. They went to the stews. George apparently fought really hard for Max to be disqualified or whatever, which worked from qualifying. He still participated, or like he got knocked down a few positions. And then Max said in an interview that he'd never experienced a driver throw another driver under the bus like that, and was feeling like it was kind of two-faced because immediately after George would come out and be like, oh my God, hey Max, and like clap him on his shoulder and act like all buddy after he just like fucked him over at the stews. And that really pissed George off and said that Max was a terrible example and everyone's scared of him and he won't back down from bullies and yada, yada, yada. And by the end of the season, it was so fun. It just became like this giant joke for everyone. And, but Max had said like, obviously we're going to squash this beef. We both live in Monaco. We'll hang out. It'll be fine. I had full faith that Max wanted to squash it. George, upon return, said to the media, I am not going to accept being pushed around and disrespected so openly. Somebody needs to stand up to individuals like that, and nobody has done that with Max. Thank God for George, the hero. Max, on the other hand, said, I have no intention of continuing any type of beef in February. I'm still enjoying my time away from F1. I honestly have nothing to say on that subject. I think... like, Max is over it. Max doesn't hold grudges in that way. And he actually didn't say anything about George other than he felt it was two-faced for him to say one thing to the stews and another thing to his face, which is fair enough. George, on the other hand, now just is suddenly like, George went like historical. Like, he just like pulled out every incident where he felt like Max sucked and just destroyed him, and he won't let it go. This is sometimes when I feel like, is George a robot and his code is malfunctioning and needs to be rebooted? Because like, let it go. Let it go. It's like, you're not going to accomplish anything. And clearly some people think he's a great role model, like your teammate. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have another bite. Okay. So actual testing, I'm going to be honest, might lose some of you guys, but, I'm not that bothered about testing. Either I don't have enough technical knowledge to understand what it means for the rest of the season. But from what I've gathered in my now fourth year of watching, is that you can't tell much from testing. People are trying to hide their car, so you don't see the full power or abilities of each individual car because they're like hiding certain elements or they're testing only certain features. People sandbag. Almost never has the fastest lap set gone on to win or whatever. Speaking of, Carlos set the fastest lap multiple times. But he did say very clearly that his fans and anyone watching F1 should not expect any podiums this year. He could be lying, but he's definitely going to do well. Definitely, I think we're going to see quite a few top 10 finishes, hopefully better, but I don't know the state of the car, which is why I'm saying like testing doesn't indicate much because like, we show up on the first race weekend and it's rarely what we saw in testing. But it's fine. I'm clearly missing something, so I apologize that I can't provide more information on testing. Other than Carlos did super well. Ferrari did well, but people think they're sandbagging, which means they might be doing better than the way they performed. Kako said something interesting during the previous DTS season, which is that the cars are going to be so close this year that the drivers are going to matter more than ever, which I think is important to keep in mind. But anyway, the only interesting thing for me that happened during testing was the lights randomly went out. Like the power died everywhere and no one understood what was happening. And there's like a hilarious video of George like telling his engineers that he needs a new visor because it's so dark out. And then he realizes the lights went out, and it's giving that time when he was like, it's raining. And it was just in sweat. Oh, George. All right. Lap 3, F1 news and rumors. So rumor number 1, Susie Wolff is potentially challenging Mohammed Ben Sulayem for FIA. I'm sorry if I butchered that. For FIA president. There have been reports that she's challenging him for the last couple of weeks. And then now there's reports coming out that she rejected that and said she gave a statement saying she didn't do that. I didn't actually see a statement from her. I saw sources close to Susie have said this, so I don't qualify that as debunking. So in my mind, all of this is still up in the air. Here's the thing. And if this is unfeminist of me, I'm sorry. I think she would be a great FIA president. I think she should be FIA president if she wasn't married to Toto. I realize there's a lot of conflicts of interests in F1 and like shady behavior and everything, but this is like a major conflict of interest. And while I think she would be neutral, and I think she would make great decisions for the driver's safety and about behavior wise, like I don't think she'd enforce the swearing thing or like whatever other nonsense Mohammed is focusing on instead of focusing on the safety of the drivers. I think she would have her priorities straight, but it would be, not only would it be concerning about potential conflict of interest with Toto, but she would be endlessly scrutinized, and that would be unfortunate because like no matter what she does, no matter how good, it'll be picked apart and then like accused of being to benefit Mercedes over everyone else. That's my only concern. Otherwise, I think she's perfect for the job and I wish she could be. But the wolf part really, I think might be an issue. Carlos, that wasn't that unfeminist of me. That was like on the border. Carlos Sainz replaces Seb as a director for the Grand Prix Drivers Association, also known as the GPDA, which by the way, as we all know, George is also a director for the GPDA, and you could really see his influence on a lot of the stuff that happened last year. The open letter they wrote, he spoke on the behalf of the GPDA a lot, and Carlos joining is like a very Carlos thing to do, but also it's a very Carlos thing to do in a completely different way than it's a completely George Russell thing to do. You know? Does that make sense? Like being a director for the GPDA makes perfect sense for both of them, but completely differently because they're entirely different people. I feel like I'm not explaining this correctly, but I actually have no other words to describe what I'm trying to say. So hopefully you picked up what I was putting down. All right, so there's definitely so much more to discuss, and there's been so much fun content online, and like we still need to talk about the F175 event, which was kind of hilarious. There's been so many fun partnerships. Like Carlos is on a freaking roll brand wise. Like he's had like 25 brand deals come out in like the last 2 weeks. It's been crazy. We've also had a lot of amazing content. He was on Stanley Tucci's food show. Lewis Hamilton was on the cover of Time magazine. So much to cover. That basically summed up a lot of it. But oh my God. Okay, wait, whatever. There's a lot to cover. But I wanted to save it for the digital warm-up at the Australian GP because I was worried nothing was going to happen this week and I wanted to have stuff to talk about. And I know I'm about to ramble the fuck out of this DTS season, and I don't want to dilly-dally much longer, but it's some great content, so come back. All right, so with that concludes our digital warm-up. On to the DTS analysis. All right, so here's the thing that I want to preface with before I get into everything. I'm never going to shit on DTS. I think it's an incredible vehicle to like get new fans into the sport. It worked for me, it works for so many people. I think it's also, once you are a fan, I think it's a really fun way to refresh, like get a refresher on the previous season as we head into the new one, to remember what happened, what didn't happen, blah, blah, blah. It's also super fun to get like a lot of behind the scenes stuff on things that we don't see because we don't have cameras there during the regular season. So there's a lot of inside stuff that we're seeing, as long as you like are avoiding the manipulation of the editing process that might be taking place. But there's a lot of great behind the scenes stuff. Now, DTS gets a lot of criticism. I understand they only have 10 episodes. And they have to fit the stories of 10 teams, 20 drivers over the course of 9 months into just 10 episodes that are like 30 to 40 minutes long. I also understand that they have different audiences they're trying to cater to. There's the new fans that don't know anything about F1 who this would be gold for. There's the casual fans. Like I have a lot of friends who just watch this every year and get like super excited and move on. Like the nuance is not entirely necessary. And then there's the fans who watch every race and know every detail of every moment that passed, me, that are bothered by certain creative liberties that have been taken here. For example, like when they use footage from a different race while they're talking about another race, that's like unnecessary. The whole thing's recorded, like you can find footage. They also like 2024 was like such an incredible year in terms of drama. There was so much content that they could have filled more than 10 episodes of. And instead they like made stuff up. Like Max and George were right there for the taking. And instead they're like, you know who probably really hates each other? Max and Lando. Never mind, they fly everywhere together. They game together. They're always laughing together. No, I think they hate each other. Like, why? That was like so unnecessary. It's not like you didn't have drama and you had to fabricate it. You just like replaced real good drama with fake drama and it makes Max look bad. And you've already lost Max once. Like, he already like opted out because you gave him a villain edit. Jump 6 seasons later, he's back on board and you're like, you know what we should do? We should make him look like a dickhead. But whatever. Wanted to get that out there and say that I personally am not quite as offended as everyone else seems to be. I thought they did a pretty good job with what they had and the amount of time they had, but I definitely think there's a lot of things they could have done better. Anyway, let's dive in. Why did I say that like that? I'm going to be going storyline by storyline versus episode by episode because they jump back into different storylines in different episodes and it's just easier to go based on storylines. Storyline number 1, Lewis leaving Mercedes. I loved seeing the behind the scenes of Toto upset because he was also upset not behind the scenes. I feel like he was even more upset behind the scenes, but he was like trying to hold it together and just like not doing a great job. He refused PR. He's like, I know what I'm going to say. Then he's like, oh my God, I'm going to go hug Lewis. And Lewis goes in for a handshake. And he's like, no, a hug. Also, I was dead at his testimonial where he got like a hair in his eye and he was cleaning it up. He's like, oh my God, I have hair in my eye. And he like spent like 5 minutes trying to get it out. He's like, you're going to use that for a shot of me crying, aren't you? And also like in the last episode, he leaves Lewis this like very dramatic voice note. Like I'm also dead at that Toto constantly lies about his activity when he's on the phone. There's that scene with Muhammad that we're going to talk about later on where he's like, I'm just getting in the car, can't talk, bye. And here he's like, hey, Lewis, so I'm on the go, so I'm going to do a voice note for you. And he's just sitting at his desk with someone else recording the voice note because I guess he couldn't figure it out. The voice note is very dramatic and I appreciated the way they cut it to sort of summarize the season. So like his voice note is like a voiceover for like scenes from the season and it was very artistically done. Loved it. But I'm still dying at the concept of how cringy it is. Like he left Lewis a voice note about how much he loved him. Like it was a cute voice note. It just felt weird that it was a voice note. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that content should have been either out loud, in a letter, an email. I don't know. The voice note feels like an odd vehicle for something that serious. Also, it was extra funny because his number one qualm was with the timing of everything. And he just could not get over how poorly timed everything was with the announcement. And the funniest part is he's saying like, he's like, what was the timing? What was the timing? And then immediately cuts to Fred and he goes, yeah, we did that on purpose. He's like, yeah, we didn't really want to go into the season with this like hanging as a secret on us. So we just said it. It was intentional. I also think it's funny that Toto and Fred are best friends. And I think it was extra funny that Toto was talking about how could he betray our friendship like this? How could he do that? Blah, blah, blah. And Fred goes, yeah, brand's more important than friendship. So I love Fred. Also, side note, Fred Vasseur speaks perfect English. Perfect. Well, he speaks great English. And I swear he just pretends he can't speak English for DTS. He just pretends like he only speaks French. I also, all the drivers, there was like a montage of all the drivers saying how cool the move was. And it is objectively very cool. But like, for me personally, I think it's really hard for me to, it's really sad for me because it's at Carlos Sainz's expense and I love him. So moving on to the next storyline, which is Carlos Sainz's future, where he was fired for doing nothing but being really good at his job. He was the only non-Red Bull driver to win in 2023. He's super strong. He's super smart. He really balances Charles out. And I think we all know that if it weren't Lewis Hamilton specifically, he wouldn't be going anywhere at all. No one else would make them even consider getting rid of Carlos, I think. But I think also that makes it harder to swallow. It's like when you get dumped for no reason other than like you fell out of love. Like you can't really justify it. Like he has absolutely nothing to, he can't even like be angry, I think, because he understands it. He's like, well, of course they would get Lewis. And of course I come second to Charles because Charles, like this whole project was built around Charles. So they were never going to get rid of Charles. Obviously it's me. I understand the business move, but what the fuck? And I think that makes it worse. Like there's nothing to be almost angry about. You're just bitter and upset, but you can't actually take it out on anyone because what else can you do? DTS did a really good job setting up why Carlos deserved to be fought over, though I reiterate that it was super weird that the biggest teams didn't fight for him. Like Toto didn't give a fuck, like at all. And I thought it was really interesting because like there was a behind the scenes convo caught between Lewis and Carlos where Lewis was like, oh, has Toto called you yet? And Carlos was like, no. And I think that means he won't call because he would have, if he was interested, he would have already called. And then he asked if Lewis, he thinks Mercedes is on the decline and if he thinks they can't win another championship. And Lewis said he doesn't think so, presumably about them being on the decline. So he doesn't fully believe they are not going anywhere, but I think he fully intended to just swap with Carlos. He like just assumed that Toto would pick him up because it's like a good driver and Toto did not. But that probably also reinforces his thought process that they're not making great decisions at the moment. It was also really funny to keep like the way they kept dramatizing this. They would show like Lewis and Charles talking and like laughing and then zoom out. And in the background, Carlos is just staring at them like full villain origin story in the making, which is funny because like, he definitely talked to Lewis. Like he could have held it against Lewis, but he clearly was not. And he was definitely not like glaring at Charles and Lewis talking. Anyway, so DTS built up Carlos's desirability with the appendix story and like continuous shots of his abs. Like we saw him, his bandages get changed. The same clip of his bandages getting changed like 14 times. Not complaining, but it was a lot. But so they like built it up how he had appendicitis, had a week off, 2 weeks off. He missed the race. He had surgery the day of the race, had 2 weeks off and came back and won, which was crazy. The reaction from everyone was just like everything. So like he was being interviewed somewhere and they were like, some would call this rushing back. And Carlos is like, why? Like genuinely confused why anyone would call this rushing back. But then like the next clip is him being like, yeah, so last week I couldn't cough, I couldn't sneeze, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't stand up. But like here I am about to race. Let me do some neck exercises and I'm back in the car. Help me in and out. But you know, I'm ready to go. And then Carlos won. And there was a clip of Fred telling Carlos Sr., we have to do surgery every week. And there was hot mic moment caught from Christian saying that's a hell of an advert for a driver who's unemployed next year. And then Kako in his interview thing was like, in Spanish, we have this phrase, blah, 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 which roughly translates to, you have the biggest balls I've ever seen in my life. But this, like, that whole thing definitely helps out of contract negotiations. And that episode literally had me dead. The way they directed and edited made it seem like Carlos was the freaking bachelor and these were all contestants, like eligible ladies fighting over him. We've got James Vowles, who's quite possible the keenest man I have ever seen in my life. Then there's Alessandro Alunni Bravi, who honestly is like kind of cool as fuck. He is first and foremost a lawyer, and a good one at that, and a team manager second, and his lawyerness has really helped inform his team managementness. And he's also rich AF because we meet him as he's on a boat on Lake Como going to tour some properties. So he's rich. Also, he's very eager for Carlos and he wants to build the whole program around him. And it has to be for like a long term, which is what I think Carlos was hesitant to sign on. And then literally out of nowhere, we have Alpine and their new terrifying consultant, Flavio Briatore, the infamous F1 head honcho. He like really, really wants Carlos, but like there's less of like those sexual undertones that we got with James Vowles and more of a, I'll cut you if I don't get Carlos. James Vowles, though, in general, was so cringy about Carlos, I could not stop laughing. Some of my favorite quotes include, "He's on fire. It wouldn't be understating it, saying that it would be a complete transformation in the history of Williams racing to have Carlos Sainz by my side. I wake up in the morning, I go to sleep at night thinking of nothing else," he says very emphatically. And then he says, "Signing a driver is like dating. You start by texting, then it leads to dinner, and then you end up in a hotel room." Honestly, I'm dead at his descriptions. He's like so keen. I remember even when this was announced, even his like public announcements were so romantic. Like he really is into Carlos. I was also dying when like he was supposed to meet with Kako and James was like running around the Williams paddock being like, "This is a top secret meeting. No one can know this is happening. No one can be here. This is top secret. This is top secret." And then some Williams lady was like, "James asked me to close the blinds. Do you think if I close them like this, people can still see inside?" And then we didn't get to sit in on the meeting, but we definitely heard them through outside the door. And Kako just sounded so exasperated. Like James was like really selling it. And Kako's like, "Yes, James, I know, I'm working on it." Anyways, the funniest part about all of that is that literally the entire paddock knew. As soon as that meeting was over, they like cut to like 12 people being like, "So I heard James and Kako had breakfast today." Just like everyone knew about this breakfast that no one was supposed to know about. Also interesting was Zach and Lando specifically discussing it. Because Zach was like, "I think I saw Kako and James having breakfast this morning." And Lando was like, "Yeah, I talked to Carlos yesterday." And they were saying that the tentative plan was Williams short-term, Audi long-term, unless Williams gets really good, which is highly likely. Which is interesting because Carlos is 30. I guess he has like a decade left, potentially. Also, the way they set up Flavio's entrance was really funny because it was right when Carlos was supposed to be signing with Williams. So they showed like James sitting in an empty conference room with the pen and paper ready to go and champagne in the corner and the ice is slowly melting. So in the end is just sitting in a bucket of water and like Carlos is still not there and still not there and still not there. It felt like they were waiting for like 5 hours. But when Carlos was asked why he didn't show, he was just like, Flavio called. And like started giggling. It was also interesting because Flavio seemed to like send in a bunch of agents. So like there was a scene where Carlos was doing like donuts in Barcelona and Jack Doohan was also participating in this. And he's an Alpine reserve driver. And you can hear the Alpine team going, "Jack, go get a selfie with Carlos." And Jack was like, "What am I supposed to do? Be like, oh, want a selfie?" And they're like, "Yes." And he's like, "For fuck's sake." And he's like slowly working his way over to Carlos and like clearly trying to figure out how to make it normal to ask him for a selfie. He really didn't want to ask him. It was so funny. And then there was a scene where Pierre was big upping the car to Carlos. He's like, "Yeah, we got big things coming, man. Like, yeah, it's going to be so good." And then he even went to Charles and was like, yeah, I really want to work with your teammate, man. But like, I guess they were in public. So he said it in French and he's like, I would like to work with your colleague. So no one knows he's talking about Carlos. But yeah, Flavio entering the picture really delayed his decision process by like several weeks, and all the drivers were annoyed. The quote of the episode for me was Jack Doohan going, Carlos is the paddock slut. And the producer goes, I was gonna say Prince Charming. But all of the drivers are annoyed. Joe was asked if he's driving in 2025 and he was like, I don't know, ask Carlos. And I really actually this whole time thought that Audi rejected Carlos, but it kind of sounds like Carlos rejected them, which good for him. I'm really glad that's the narrative and not the other way. Also, side note, I just like am continuously obsessed with every Sainz man. Mostly because I haven't met the woman. I'm sure I'd be obsessed with them too, but like they're all fabulous. I love them so much. Anyways, eventually Carlos signs with Williams, and the way they set the scene killed me. It like showed all three men waiting anxiously in their offices with like pens and like ready to go. And then it like cuts to Carlos walking down the hall, and it keeps cutting between all four people as he's walking down the hall. And then he like zooms in on his hand turning the doorknob, and I'm like, who's he gonna choose? And I know who he chose because I lived through it, but I was still on the edge of my seat being like, will it be James? It was. It seems like a really good move. James is a lot. He's a lot, but I'm also slightly concerned Carlos made an enemy of Flavio, and that's not an enemy you want. But I don't think Alpine would have been a good fit, and I think he'll have more success in creating something good at Williams than at Audi, because that's what Valtteri was brought on to do and what happened to him. But I did really enjoy the storyline because this was so hush-hush during the season. And so it's exciting to see how this stuff comes to fruition behind the scenes and how involved Kako is. Love that. All right, next storyline is Alpine. So the Alpine situation was actually fascinating because there was so much weird shit happening over there all year. And I don't know if everyone knew about Flavio and it was just me, but like I was unaware that there was like someone working the strings back there. He literally calls himself a democratic dictator, which should really inform how he operates. First of all, Pierre can hang with Flavio, which is very impressive. He holds his own, he like bites back, and I think Flavio appreciates that. And I'm very impressed, and I really think that's why he still has a spot on the team, because he doesn't back down from Flavio. Esty Bestie cannot hang with Flavio. It was like actually tragic how much Flavio hated him. He just like shat on him all the time. One of the things he said was like, unfortunately, Esteban was nowhere, which like after a race, to describe someone's performance in it was to say he just was nowhere, is a little crazy. Flavio also says that Esteban wouldn't stop bitching about the car. He's like, he just keeps complaining, like, don't be a spoiled brat. Like, oh, sorry, the car keeps crashing on me and dying and has reliability issues, but like, I won't be a spoiled brat. But it really sound like Esteban framed it when he, in his testimonial or whatever they're called, being like, yes, I have chosen to leave Alpine, but this really sounds like it was Flavio's decision. So I don't know if it was just one of those like quit or you're fired type situations. But he also did chuckle. So maybe he chuckled because he didn't have a choice. Also, side note, not in DTS, but like a juicy piece of information is that apparently Alpine found out about Esteban visiting Haas because he took his company issued car and they tracked his GPS. Which on one hand, silly of Esteban. On the other hand, why are they tracking his location? But like Haas doesn't seem to want him either. There's this like when Io announces to the Haas garage that our Haas team that Esteban's coming over, and he's like, any questions? And then this man in an apron like picks up his hand and he's like, is Ocon the best choice for us? Like, oh, thanks that you said something. Let me go remove this contract. Like, what is going to happen with that? And why does no one like him? And why hasn't Ollie Bierman been mentioned? He'll be mentioned later, but I feel like how he got his Haas seat matters. But eventually when we do meet him, we meet him when he fills in for Kevin as opposed to when he filled in for Carlos. Also, he's drinking banana milk. He's like, oh my God, there's banana milk on my mouth. Banana. But anyway, at least we know why Esteban was treated so egregiously, and it was Flavio. And he also would not share more tea, and that made me really upset. Like, he was just like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And I'm like, well, I want you to talk about it. Give me more information. But obviously, Flavio is a dangerous enemy to have. So, all right, next storyline, McLaren and Lando Norris. So first, the big thing was the constructor fight for McLaren. And a big theme in the show and in real life was that McLaren was not ready for a constructor's fight. And yet there they were. They had a car that was ready to win a championship, but they as a team were definitely not ready to win a championship. And a big part of that was getting Zach to choose a number one driver, which seemed virtually impossible for him because, like, I think he feels like, I don't know, head frat man, and these are his little pledges and he needs to love them all equally. I don't know, but like, he like would not choose one, even though it was like quite obvious who it should be because Lando was ahead in the championship, needs to win. You are allowed to choose a temporary D1. He's also been there longer. He has seniority. So like, I don't really know. Like, the whole episode was just him like, it's Lando, but should I pick him? Like, yes. And I was also kind of disappointed that like people talked about how good Oscar was, but they didn't really show how good Oscar was. Like, his first win was shown through the lens of like poor decision making from McLaren, and also framing it as if it was really Lando's win that he gave to Oscar, which is not what happened. And his second win was not really documented quite as well, which is annoying because it would be nice if they also demonstrated why it's so difficult for Zach to pick a D1 as opposed to just him saying they're both great, you know? Because it is a difficult, like, I think Lando was obviously the number one option because seniority and ahead in the championship. But in terms of skills, it is a difficult decision. So I totally get where Zach would be struggling, but I feel like the average viewer would not. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like McLaren accidentally built a good car. And they're like, wait, what? And then they won and everyone was like, wait, what? I did appreciate DTS showing Christian begrudgingly going to congratulate Zach. He didn't want to, but he did because he knows he's supposed to, which it was great. All right. The other thing is the Lando and Max situation. So first of all, love that they started with them as children and watched them grow up together. Lando straight up says we're good friends. Buxton, and then this was really weird to me. Will Buxton says the difference between Max and Lando is that Max has a complete fuck you attitude, and that's not Lando. But like, I don't think when Will said that's not Lando, he meant that like, oh, Lando's like a dweeb who likes puppies and Max is a flaming asshole in every aspect of his life. That's not what he meant. He meant Max has a winner's mentality on track and he has a fuck you attitude on track because his priority is to win. Lando does not necessarily have that mindset on track. But the way that they showed it, they showed Max on track and like swearing, and then they cut to Lando playing with puppies and then like trying to kick a soccer ball and falling on his face. And they're like, oh, what a dweeb. That's not what he meant. Like, Max is not going around shouting fuck you at people in real life. He's sitting at home playing video games with his cats. I also like, I don't know, the way they definitely were trying to make Max to be the villain, but like, they show Max saying that people who make it in F1 are not usually the most talented. It's the people who combine talent with hard work. Hard work is more important. Talent isn't enough. And then it cuts to Lando saying that there's a lot of differences between him and Max. Primarily, Max is more aggressive. He's a naturally born racer. And of course, his father told him how to behave on track. So like the opposite of what Max said, where Max is clearly saying hard work is important. Lando's like, well, his dad helped him. Like, and he's talented. Like, that's not why Max is who he is. Max definitely worked for it. But also we're cutting between like, there's a paddle scene where Lando, Max, and George are playing together. And now Max has actual beef with George, but doesn't have beef with Lando. And then him and Lando go to their cars and Lando's driving this weird, jolly tractor thing, and Max gets into his like proper SUV, and Lando's like, drive carefully, and Max is like, you know I do, and then it cuts obviously to him being dangerous on track. But like what really pissed me off is that the way they portrayed Miami, they showed Max being really angry at Lando's first win and like sulking in a corner. Max was thrilled for Lando. He praised him in interviews. He was really happy for him. He's like, Miami, he literally was on stream last night and he was like, apparently I was really pissed off in Miami, but it was like the best night of my life. I just partied all night with Lando because he won. Also, an iconic moment that they missed was in the press conference. They asked Max if he thinks Lando would have won without a safety car, and Max says, "If my mom had balls, she'd be my dad." And they didn't play that. They showed him to have no personality. It was so upsetting. I think if I hadn't watched the actual season, the underdog story would have gotten to me. But because I did, and because I know that they're framing Max completely incorrectly, it kind of more pissed me off. Like, he's not like this little kid that Max is bullying. Like, he's just whining about it. Max might have gone a little aggressive a couple of times on track, but he didn't really do anything wrong. He always apologized to Lando whenever he messed up on track. And Lando messed up just as much. Lando was driving quite dangerously himself. So can't really, and I'm never gonna get over Lando winning Max's home race and crossing the finish line and saying simply lovely, which is Max's thing. That's just rude. Other highlights, the Christian storyline was interesting. Like, obviously I really wanted the behind the scenes from that, but they legally aren't allowed to talk about it. So it basically was everything we already know, plus some the behind the scenes stuff was Christian just going, can't talk about it. It was interesting to see him and Ginger Spice sort of relax as the season went on, because like in the first episode and like the first few months of the season, they were really uptight and guarded. She was like doing that smile where she was like through pain almost, like she was trying so hard to smile, like she couldn't stop. But like whether she forgave him, whether he was able to explain the situation, whatever happened, they relaxed throughout the season. And she ended up becoming her usual weird, jokey, chatty self that she usually is. Not that she's weird, but her jokes sometimes are a little strange. And Christian did have one funny moment that I like. Well, he had a lot of funny moments, but pertaining to this, he was like in the car with the Netflix producers, and he goes, "So how's it going? You're not going to give me the villain edit this year, are you?" And the producer goes, "When have we ever done that?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know, seasons 1 through 6. I loved the Charles episode. I cried all over again, him winning Monaco. They really are good at building up his story. And the fact that this, like, I think they do it every season, but the fact that this season it ends with him actually winning the Monaco Grand Prix just made it like this like emotional crescendo that like I felt during the season, but it was really nice to see it dramatized, and like I cried harder. He's just like such a little tragic hero, and I adore him, and he truly makes great TV. I love that he bikes home to and from the race. I love that he takes his dog for a walk the night before the race in the middle of Monaco, and when everyone's asking him for pictures, and then he's like, "This is so stressful. Like, I just can't get a moment of peace." Like, maybe don't walk your dog in the middle of your home race in a country that's like 5 feet long. I also really love the relationship between Fred and Charles. I know he kind of raised him at Alfa Romeo, but when they jumped in the harbor, Fred was, I presume he was asked if he's a good swimmer, and he goes, "Swimming is a big word. Some have compared me to a sperm whale." I didn't really enjoy the Haas and Alpine storyline because I feel like Alpine had so much of their own drama that the story ended up being diluted with like a rivalry that no one really cared about. I'd rather they focus on the Esteban Pierre dynamic, on Flavio's entry. And I know they did a lot, but if they're going, like, they don't need to mix in the Haas stuff. Like, it's unnecessary. I'd much rather focus on the inner workings of Alpine, which are very strange and continued to confuse me. What I did think was funny was when they introduced the team principal for Haas, who's an engineer, they cut to Christian asking about him, and he's like, who? Dick. But then he goes, "All these vanilla engineers, all they care about is data, not how it used to be a few years ago." And they cut to Flavio Briatore. But like, don't you all care about data? How else are you doing your job? And what's a vanilla engineer? Although that is a great term to describe James Vowell specifically. I thought that this Mercedes search for a new driver storyline was a good episode, but a lot of it was focused on George Russell proving himself, basically proving he's not a little bitch. And the way he proved it in the episode was by winning Spa, which he was actually disqualified from. And then he like did go on to win Vegas. So I don't know why they couldn't use the Vegas as the storyline building up to him being like accepted as a leader. And in terms of Kimmy, I love the introduction of him. He was like little Spider-Man to Toto's Iron Man. Toto was like, how was school? And he was like, good. And he's just like a little baby. And then I loved seeing the test that he did because he was just really fast. And Toto was so impressed. And then in the middle of it, Toto got a call from Mohammed, the FIA president. And he goes, oh my God, Mohammed, I'm just getting in the car. I can't talk. Can I call you back later? And hangs up. And the whole room just like stares at him. They're like, you're not getting in a car. And he was like, oh yeah, I just would rather watch this. It was pretty funny. I just love that Toto, one of Toto's like quintessential personality traits is that he lies about his circumstances on the phone. I absolutely loved the Singapore episode. I love that the drivers recorded their days and it was interspersed with the usual stuff that with the official footage and with like the interviews that they do. I thought it was great. Alex was hilarious. He should vlog all the time. The whole time he's like, I feel like a YouTuber every time he said something. I also love that we got some insight that George and Alex fly commercial. I do believe that Alex flies commercial more often than George. I think the way he phrased it, he was like, George will fly commercial. So I feel like he will occasionally get George to fly commercial with him. But also Alex is telling the story on a private jet. So a little confusing. Also, George was like, yeah, I travel commercial. Lando would never travel commercial. And then he gets to his hotel room and unpacks a queen size duvet and a pillow. And I'm like, are you traveling commercial with a whole bed set? It was also really cool. Like I knew that they stay on European time, but it was cool to like see it in action. Like them waking up at like 3 p.m. The scene with Charles and Alex, his girlfriend, having breakfast, or the breakfast. And Charles goes, oh, what are we having for breakfast, Alex? And she was like, oh, chicken saute, and like brings some over. And he was like, ew, I'm not eating chicken saute for breakfast. That's lunch food. And Alex is like, it's 3 p.m. That was quite funny. Also, random funny quote, because they were doing this format for Singapore. Obviously, Alex got mic'd up, and Carlos and Charles are in the car, and Carlos goes, oh, I heard they mic'd your girlfriend up. You're basically becoming the Kardashians. And Charles goes, oh, we are the Kardashians of Formula One. It's funny. I did like that we got some insight into Pierre and Charles's relationship. I love that he calls him calamari, and I really would like to know why. And also George and Alex's, those two friendships are pretty strong, and I like them. Lando's not really friends with either. Well, he is good friends with all of them, but like it's not like duoed up in that way. I think he's best friends is like Carlos and then Max Fetro, whatever you say it. And also he's good friends with everyone, but like those two seem like tight. Like tighter than anyone else in the grid. One thing I hated about this episode though was seeing George's panic attack. Like we could see it building, and then Carmen shut the door, but Netflix stayed outside the door, and we could hear his microphone and him like literally hyperventilating. And I thought that was a bit, maybe a little uncomfortable. I don't know if they ran it past him before they included it, but I was a little distressed hearing him like that. Especially, we knew how hot it was in Singapore, and for it to cause a panic attack is like stressful. And I hope they did run it by him. Anyway, several missed storylines here. Logan Sargent's departure from Williams. They just showed James Vowell's like really angry. He's like, I can't do this anymore. And then like, that was it. They didn't show Franco Calapinto, who was a huge part of the season, and I feel like would have made great content. I'm not really sure why he wasn't included, but he was just like entirely omitted. We only heard him referenced a couple of times by the commentators. I wish they had given Checo a proper send-off for his retirement in the same way they did for Daniel. That was really sweet, by the way, the whole Daniel like farewell. I know he was really important to DTS more so than Checo, but like Checo didn't really get much from the grid, from his team, and he's like retiring basically. And so it would have been nice if they didn't just like, the way they filmed it was so depressing. He's like, yeah, well, sometimes it works out, and it's really hard being Max's teammate. And that was it. It was just depressing. And then it showed him walking out of the paddock. I also am still upset that they didn't show George versus Max. And also I'm annoyed they didn't do the swearing storyline, like contention with the FIA, because I think that's important. And I think it's really interesting context to add to everything. All right, so that's about it. I have so many thoughts about DTS this season, and I wish I could include them all. I think I have about 25 pages of notes, and I really try to condense it because no one wants to sit here for 25 pages worth of notes. But with all of that, I think we're caught up on, we've rehashed last season. We're caught up on some of the basic happenings during our off season, and we really know who's who in the inner workings of teams and any important drama to keep in mind. And really, we're all set for 2025. So we're kicking off this weekend in Melbourne. I'm very excited. I think I'm going to make a meat pie, but I might change my mind. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed part 1 and part 2 and it wasn't too wordy. But anyways, I'll see you all in Melbourne. Box.